Hi, my name is Sue White and I teach finance at the University of Maryland. I'm here today to talk about ethics. In particular, I'm going to talk about the CFA Institute Code of Ethics and Standards. I very strongly believe that ethics starts with the individual. Many years ago, when you were a child, you listened to your parents and wanted to do things that would please your parents and that were the right things to do. The CFA Institute takes that one step further and says, think about what the client would want you to do. What would please the client, satisfy the client, and be in the best interests of the client. In my opinion, you can combine the two. If you both think about what would your mother say and think about what is in the best interests of the client, you're good to go. You'll be making good decisions that way. And to give you an example of why thinking about both is important, suppose you're a broker and your client wants you to trade on inside information and make piles and piles of money. If you did that, you might make the client very happy, but you would not be making your mother proud, especially if you got hauled off to jail for insider trading. So again, very important to have strong personal, individual ethical standards, as well as always keeping in the forefront the idea of putting the client's best interests first. I also liked what Aristotle said many centuries ago. He said that if he wanted to learn about ethics and morals, he would look for someone who has lived a moral life, rather than looking for someone who's been able to memorize moral arguments and has studied moral readings. So again, ultimately, it is a code of ethics is not just something that you read about and learn about and then take an exam and forget about ethics. An ethical code is something that you live, something that impacts all of your life. Now, what I'm going to be doing today is very specifically going over the Code of Ethics. And again, you don't need to memorize the Code of Ethics. You don't need to memorize the standards. What I'll be doing more is talking about what each standard is and then giving a scenario, talking about how you could be in a situation where you need to think about what the code would say or what the standard would say, and then respond appropriately to that situation. First, let's look at the Code of Ethics and what the Code of Ethics says. The Code of Ethics says, first of all, that you should act ethically, with integrity, you should be competent, you should be respectful, you should act with diligence, and more importantly, that you should act this way to all people, not just to clients, but to employees, employers, the general public. That again, this is a way of living, not simply a code that you memorize. And I might also add that for the CFA Code of Ethics, very specifically, the Institute says that it applies to covered people, and I want to define what a covered person is. A covered person is a candidate, a CFA charter holder, or a CFA member. So again, this Code of Ethics very specifically applies to people who are covered under the Code of Ethics. So again, the first provision is a very key provision, that you act ethically, that ethics is a part of your life overall. The second part of the code says that you need to encourage others. In other words, it's not enough to act ethically yourself. You need to encourage others to act ethically. Basically what that's saying is, while tattling may not be acceptable behavior on the playground, it is acceptable in the business world. You not only have to act ethically, but you have to make sure that others are acting ethically. The third point of the code says that you need to continually strive to improve both your own competence and the competence of others. So of course you're responsible for your own actions, but if you can improve the profession, improve other people, teach other people, that will help also. The next provision of the code says you need to exercise reasonable care and judgment. Don't rush to a decision. Make sure that you have all of the information that's needed to make an appropriate decision. The next provision of the code says that you always need to put the interests of the client and the profession before your own interests. So again, think about what will reflect well on the profession and think about what is in the best interests of the client. And the last provision of the code states that you need to promote capital market integrity. In other words, don't do a Martha Stewart. Think of what the rules are for the capital markets and follow those rules. That's the code. Again, relatively simple, 6 provisions. In my opinion, somewhat common sense provisions also, things that an ethical person would naturally do and want to do. Now, what I'm going to talk about next are the standards that the CFA Institute has set up. There are a number of standards with provisions in each standard. And what I'll be doing is first talking about the standard and then giving a little scenario to illustrate what that standard means. Now, the first standard says that what you need to do is have a knowledge of the law. It is your responsibility to know what the law says, not only to know what the government says, what the U.S. government says, but to know what regulatory agencies say, what licensing agencies say, what the professional associations associated with your profession say, and to follow those rules. This is a very key standard and in many respects a core of the whole idea of the ethics code and having standards. One of the ideas here is that the CFA Institute, the word CFA, that's a trademark. And the CFA Institute wants to protect that trademark. If you have a lot of financial scandals and you have a situation where the people being arrested and led off to prison are all CFA charter holders, that's going to damage that trademark. There will be less value to that trademark. People who are thinking of becoming a CFA are going to say, oh, you know, look what those people did. That's terrible. That's going to devalue the trademark. The CFA Institute wants there to be value for the trademark. They would like a situation where if there are scandals, the people involved in the scandals are not CFA members. That will make others say, hey, you know, look, these people have a code of ethics. They're not in the same kind of trouble that all of these other people are in, and this is a good set of guidelines to live by. So again, first standard, knowledge of the law. Let me tell you the story about Monica Lewis. Monica lived in a lot of foreign countries when she was a child. She has all kinds of extensive contacts from her childhood and from her relatives. Now she's in the U.S. and she works for a big investment firm. She travels to New Iberia very frequently. This is where her brother lives. In fact, her future mother-in-law lives there also. And she's gotten a lot of good tips from her trips to New Iberia. And let me also add that the regulations in New Iberia are a little bit looser than they are in the United States. One of the requirements in New Iberia is that new businesses need to get licensed. Now, this is kind of a very thinly veiled kickback situation. Ostensibly, the licenses are there to make sure that businesses in New Iberia are operating properly. But again, it's just one more fee, one more way for the government to collect revenue. On one of her many business trips to New Iberia, and personal trip also, she got to visit her brother, she learns that a major U.S. corporation is about to be granted a license. This is information that she's gotten before, information like this, and it has helped her do a really good job preparing reports for her firm back in the U.S. On her way back to the U.S. on the plane, she sits next to a man who happens to work for the company who just got a license at New Iberia. She congratulates him for getting the license and says it looks like he's got a lot of new business contacts and leads coming up, and gets off the plane and continues her business. A little bit later, the guy that she met on the plane is talking with Monica's supervisor, Paul. And he says, hey, you really need to look into the contacts that Monica has. She knows information before other people do, and she may be acting on that information. Okay, there's the situation. Now, has Monica violated Standard 1A? Again, Standard 1A is knowledge of the law. Well, first of all, she has acted perfectly okay as far as all the laws of New Iberia are concerned. It's fine for people to have contacts and to know information before other people do. However, she does have inside information. According to U.S. law, she would be in violation. And this particular standard states that it's the higher level of law that matters. So even if she's okay with New Iberia law, she is potentially acting on inside information, and that is a violation. She needs to hold to the stricter standard of U.S. law. She needs to be aware of U.S. laws and not violate U.S. laws, even if something is perfectly legal in another country. Now, what about her supervisor, Paul? Once he is made aware that Monica potentially or possibly is violating the law, he needs to take action about it. It's not enough just to sit back and say, this doesn't concern me. It does concern him. He has an obligation under Standard 1A to make sure that any violations of the law are corrected and don't happen again. Now, I'd like to move on to Standard 1B. Standard 1B is all about independence and objectivity. What Standard 1B states is that the analyst must be objective. That means things like don't take any gifts that might influence you, don't have any benefits that could compromise your independence. Now let's look at a scenario that illustrates this standard. Okay, let's look at the story of Jeff. Jeff works for a large investment banking firm in the Northwest, and one of the areas that he covers is the timber industry. Forest Industries has offered him a chance to go tour the sawmills and facilities of Forest Industries business. This is very important as an analyst to get lots of information about the company. And I might also add that the chairman of Forest Industries sits on the board of Jeff's firm as well. Now, Jeff knows that there is a rule not to accept gifts, particularly gifts of large value, that could influence his recommendations. But he's got a problem. The only way to get to these very out-of-the-way sawmill facilities is through a charter flight. There are no commercial airlines that fly in that way. There are no hotels there. He'd have to stay in a hunting lodge that is owned by the firm. And he's really unsure about what he can do in this situation. Can he maintain his independence? Well, first of all, what this standard says is, if you have no other alternatives, no other reasonable alternatives, it's okay to accept gifts of transportation and lodging and meals by the company. And in this particular case, he's got no commercial aircraft that he can fly. There are no hotels where he could stay at. So it's okay for him to accept the gift of a chartered flight out to the sawmills and lodging in the hunting lodges that are by the sawmills. So Jeff can accept these gifts, but now let's say he's seen the sawmills and he's ready to write his report. At this point, he's got several alternatives. Suppose he has done his investigation and he's found some negative things about the company. What Jeff does have to do to maintain this standard is make sure that he writes his report as if he were not influenced. He has to make sure that he's not letting the gift of airfare and lodging influence his report. He's got to make sure that he's not letting the fact that the chairman of Forest Industries sits on the board of his company, he's got to make sure that that does not influence his decision. So he needs to do one of two things. He needs to write his report as honestly and objectively as he can, give that report to his superiors, and say these are his recommendations, and if anything changes in that, he cannot accept that this is his report, like it or not like it. Or if he feels there are very strong conflicts that cannot be overcome, he can tell his company, recommend that his company no longer cover the timber industry and that they should not write reports on this particular company because of conflicts. Now that's the second part of the first standard. Next, I'm going to talk about the third part of this standard, which is about misrepresentation. Standard 1C states that you cannot make any misrepresentations concerning the analysis that you do, the recommendations that you make, any actions that you take, or any professional activities. What that means is you cannot claim that you have any special skills just because you have a CFA designation. You certainly can state that you have the designation, but you can't state that you've got any extraordinary abilities because of it. You need to be able to separate opinions from facts. Now, to give an example of this situation, suppose you and 4 of your buddies decide to start your own investment firm. You've been working, and your friends also have been working for the past 5 years in the investment industry. You get together and form a small firm that is going to provide for the investment needs of your clients. You get together all of the literature for the firm, and you state, we have 25 years of experience in the investment field, and we can handle all of your portfolio needs. This statement is a violation of Standard 1C. This is because having 5 people with 5 years of experience each is not the same thing as saying you've got 25 years of experience. Stating you've got 25 years of experience implies that you've got 25 years of continuous experience. Also, you can't state, we can meet all of your investment needs. A very small firm with only 5 people in it truly cannot cater to the needs of every single client everywhere. So again, you need to be objective, state what you can do, and don't misrepresent what your qualifications are, even if it's just a misrepresentation by implication. Let me tell you another story about misrepresentation. Tisha works for a firm that manages investments of high net worth individuals. Times have been kind of hard in the industry, and a number of people have been laid off, so she recognizes how valuable her job is and how precarious her job is. Because people have been laid off, there's more work for everybody at the office and more demands on the part of the clients. Her boss says it would be a really great idea to publish a weekly newsletter to let the clients know what kinds of investments they can be looking toward in the future, and just to keep them updated, something that'll keep them happy and make them want to stay with the firm. Tisha already is overwhelmed with all of the work that she has to do, and she just doesn't know how is she going to get the information to go into a weekly newsletter. She meets her friend Carlos and has this discussion with him over coffee. She's ready to tear out her hair. She just doesn't know where she's going to find the time to do all the things she has to do. Now, Carlos works for a financial services firm, and he said, hey, no problem. You know, why reinvent the wheel? I'll give you some of the research analyst reports that I have access to at my firm. Then you can just take a little information from that. So Carlos gives Tisha some reports, and at first, hey, this is great. She'll just take a little bit of the information, a few ideas here and there. She prepared her first weekly newsletter. Her boss thought that was great. He was very happy with that newsletter. Well, as time goes on and Trisha's workload isn't letting up at all, she finds she's taking more and more information from Carlos's analyst reports. And at times, she doesn't even have enough time to rewrite it. She's just taking paragraphs directly from those reports. She sees Carlos at lunch again, and he says, hey, come on over. Our star analyst is giving a talk on the biotech industry. You might get some really good ideas for your clients from Fred's talk. So Tisha goes over, listens to Fred. He gives a very impressive analysis of a particular biotech company and what's happening both with the company and with the industry. Tisha's been very carefully taking notes on the presentation, and she includes that in her next newsletter. A few days later, Tisha's boss is on the golf course with a client, and the client says, hey, I read your newsletter, and it was practically word for the presentation that I heard from Fred over at the big financial services firm. What's happening here? Has Fred been stealing ideas from your employees? You better watch that. Okay, let's look at this situation. What's happening here? Is Tisha doing something wrong? Has she violated Standard 1C? She has violated Standard 1C. First of all, she is presenting work as her own, and the work is not her own. She is taking this information directly from someone else's reports. She has not verified the information. She is accepting it. She does not know how true it is. She's got no basis for her recommendations. She's simply taking someone else's recommendations. Now, taking an idea and expanding on it, you could argue that that's okay, particularly if you're adding your own work. You just got an idea from someone. But by the point that Tisha is taking word-for-word paragraphs from the research reports, that's plagiarism, and that's wrong. That violates the standards. Then, when Tisha goes to hear Fred and hears all of his recommendations for this great biotech company, once again, she is taking somebody else's work. That is a misrepresentation, and that is a violation of Standard 1C. So again, for Standard 1C, make sure that you are not misrepresenting your own qualifications, you're not misrepresenting what you can do and what you can deliver, and you're not taking someone else's work and presenting it as your own work. That's Standard 1C. Now, let's turn to Standard 1D. Standard 1D is about misconduct. Standard 1D states that you can't be dishonest, you can't be fraudulent, you can't deceive people, and in fact, any act that reflects badly on your reputation, your integrity, and your competence is a violation of this standard. What this standard states is you must make sure not only that you act ethically as far as the profession is concerned, but you must make sure that you act ethically in other areas as well. In other words, if your investment professional got arrested for insider trading, clearly that's a violation of the standard. But on the other hand, if you have an investment professional who acts perfectly ethically and perfectly correctly in all business matters, and then sells drugs on weekends, that's a violation of the standard as well. Someone who is a drug trafficker, that's going to reflect badly on the person and on the individual. So you must act ethically and legally, both in your own investment professional behavior and in your own personal behavior, even if it is not directly related to investments. Let's talk about the story of Tom. Tom has been employed for about 15 years now, and he's had lots of late nights, lots of weekend work, lots of out-of-town trips, and his wife suspects that all of those out-of-town trips were not just for business. So after 20 years of marriage, she said, "That's it, I can't take any more," and she has filed for divorce. This was totally unexpected to Tom. He just does not know how to handle it. His co-workers said, "Hey, Tom, you need to be cheered up a little bit." They take Tom out on a Friday night. Tom has lots and lots of drinks, and he's really not used to drinking that much. He has fun singing Sinatra songs in the karaoke machine, and after many, many drinks, he passes out. His friends bundle him into a cab, and he goes home. The next morning, they all joke about his behavior, and Tom's not really quite remembering what he did that night, very vague memories of that night. His supervisor, Jane, wonders if she should say or do anything about this, but she said, "Hey, he's got a reason. He's very unhappy about the divorce. This is just a one-time lapse," and Jane decides to let things slide. Well, time goes on, and Tom finds he really needs those evening drinking sessions more and more. He's drinking more, staying out late more, and now it's beginning to affect his work. He's coming in late to those Monday morning meetings, and even worse than that, he has missed some really, really important opening market trades. Now, fortunately, his clients haven't noticed. His assistant, who is not legally allowed to make the trades, has noticed that Tom hasn't been around and has entered those trades in his name. So the client doesn't know about the problem. Is Tom guilty of misconduct? Yes, not only is Tom guilty of misconduct, but his supervisor, Jane, needed to step in and take action as well. You could potentially excuse one lapse, not a problem. But once there is a pattern of behavior that's going to impact work, that is a problem. Tom has missed some very important trades, and he has allowed his assistant, who is legally not able to make trades, to make the trades in his name. And that's wrong. That's misconduct. On top of that, as a supervisor, Jane has an obligation first to counsel Tom and tell him that his behavior is a problem and warn him that he needs to stop this behavior. And second, Jane needs to be aware of the fact that Tom's assistant is trading illegally when Tom does not have the authorization to trade. So here's an example of what is happening in off-work hours, in his personal life, that is still misconduct because it is impacting his personal life. Now that's the end of Standard 1. Let's move on to Standard 2. Standard 2, Part A, talks about acting on material, non-public information. The basic rule is, and this is a very easy rule to follow, is don't act on non-public material information. Now, before I talk more about this, I'd like to give you some legal definitions of material and non-public. Material says something that is going to impact the value of the company, something that might impact the stock price, something that investors who are interested in this security might really want to know about. So in other words, suppose a company is about to get a really, really big government contract. That's material information. That could very conceivably impact the stock price. Now, suppose that same company is going to donate $10,000 to the local Little League and build a new baseball field. Yes, that's information, and that's non-public information, but that's not material. That's not anything that investors are going to say, I really need to know that, and that's going to impact the price of the stock. So again, material information, something that's going to impact the price of the stock. Now let's look at the non-public part of that information. This is information that has not been disseminated to the general public. This is, again, say you heard about the Little League information because you're a volunteer for the Little League and you knew the company was making a donation. That's non-public information. Government contracts, perhaps you work for a company that deals with the contracts and you learn about it before the general public does, before this is announced. That's non-public information. Now, in terms of using non-public information, this standard is not designed to discourage a really good and a really smart analyst from taking pieces of public information and turning it into an analysis that is non-public information. Let me give an example of this. I have a former student who at age 26 became the youngest major donor to the university. Now, most 26-year-olds don't have a spare $50,000 to donate to their university. He did because he was very, very good at taking available information and putting it together and making a better analysis and better recommendations than other analysts did. He was studying a particular firm in the chemicals business, and he looked deep into public information and found out that they were going to have a supply problem. So while the rest of the business was saying, great company, buy this company, in fact it was on the cover of Business Week, he was saying, no, bad company, sell the company, they're going to have supply problems. So he had taken public information and ended up having private, non-public information because he was able to study that company and correctly interpret that information. So that's okay. It's okay if you're a better analyst than the average analyst and you're able to take dispersed pieces of information and put them together into a whole picture. What is not correct is if you have a specific piece of non-public material information and you trade on that information. To determine whether information is non-public and material, you should ask the following kinds of questions. Is this information that's going to impact the value of the company? Is this information that was obtained illegally or inappropriately? Did the information breach a confidentiality agreement? Is this something related to a tender offer or a merger or some other very big announcement in the life of the firm? Would trading in the security result in a breach of duty? If your answer to any of these questions is yes, then what you should do is try to get the information disseminated publicly. You should not trade on material, non-public information. Now, let's look at some examples about this. Let's take the case of Seaton. He worked for the U.S. Treasury Department. He's left the Treasury Department, and now he works for a consulting company that specializes in government bonds. One of his friends invites him to go to a U.S. Treasury Department press conference. At the press conference, there is an understanding that the information that is released is confidential until the appropriate timeline is followed. The Treasury has a timeline that says this information can be released at this specific time. He goes to the press conference and he hears the announcement that the U.S. government is no longer going to sell a particular type of bonds. This is big news. He goes back to his office. He calls one of his major clients, who's a bond trader, and tells him this. So his client, the bond trader, stocks up on the bonds, knowing that there's going to be a great deal of demand and the price is going to be run up as soon as this information becomes public. Has Seaton committed a violation? Yes, he has. First of all, he was an employee of the Treasury, so he knows that this information is confidential. His friend who invited him to the press conference had an expectation of confidentiality. He did not expect this information to be disseminated to the public. It was certainly material information, it was going to have a big impact on the price of bonds, and it was non-public information. This is very clearly a violation of the insider trading laws, both illegal and unethical. There can be violations that don't break the law, and this is a personal example. I have a friend who worked for the Department of Labor, and one of her jobs was to release information about employment statistics to the press. This is very important information. It's a very leading economic indicator. What is happening to labor statistics? Is unemployment increasing or decreasing? Well, it turned out that her watch was off, not by much, off by just a minute or two, and she was routinely releasing information a minute or two early. When they found out about it, there was a huge year-long investigation of this to make sure that she had not profited in any way from this information. And of course she hadn't, so there were no legal violations. But that's a case where time is very, very important, and even having a slight edge can lead to violations to using non-public material information. Again, in her case, not a violation. Another example, the SEC just accused some former employees of Citizens Financial of insider trading related to the announcement of the acquisition of Charter One Financial. One of the employees had conveyed this information ahead of time to a friend who ran a hedge fund. Their friend traded on that information, and they, as investors in the hedge fund and family members who invested in the hedge fund, profited from this. Martha Stewart case is another example. Martha Stewart, of course, was not convicted of illegal insider trading, but she knew that ImClone was going to have a bad news announcement that one of their drugs didn't get approval, and she traded on that information. Again, as I say, she was not convicted of illegal insider trading, simply of lying to the authorities, but many people believe that she did have inside information ahead of the market. Now, those are cases of illegal inside information and illegal trading. Let's look at a case of insider information that is not a case of illegal insider trading. Let's look at the case of Alex. Alex works for an investment banking firm that also does equity research, and he studies the energy business. He has done a lot of work in his studies and has correctly anticipated that the firm that he was analyzing and another firm were going to merge. There is what is called a firewall between the research side and the investment banking side in his firm, which by the way is required, that the research people don't talk to the investment banking people, that they don't get information ahead of time. Well, after Alex has made his recommendation that there's going to be a merger in this field and you should buy this particular company that was going to be acquired, he gets a call from the legal department. And they say, hey, you know, come in, we need to talk to you. And he's both a little nervous about it, but also pleased. He's happy that he was able to correctly take the information and anticipate that this energy trading company was going to be bought out. So he goes to the legal people and he explains, hey, here's my research. Here are my notes. This is what I did, and this is why I made the recommendation to buy this stock, because I thought it was going to be acquired. The lawyer was really, really impressed with Alex's research and Alex's notes and said that he had everything very, very well documented, and that under what is called the mosaic theory, that if you take a lot of pieces and put them together into a picture, because again of your good research, your good analysis, you're okay, you're covered. That is not a violation. So in this case, even though it looked like Alex had illegal inside information, that he was getting information from the investment banking side that was handling the merger, he did not have any information from the investment banking side. He had taken public information and put all the pieces together, this mosaic theory, and determined that this company was a good takeover candidate and therefore a good buy. Section 2B is about market manipulation. What this standard says is, don't do anything that's going to distort prices or distort trading volume. Say that you have more or less trading volume than you actually have. Now for this one, I'm going to tell a story, and you're going to think I'm making this up, but I'm not. This really is a true story. A few years ago, the SEC charged a 14-year-old kid with something called pump and dump. What he was doing was, he would buy shares of some very thinly traded micro-cap stocks. In other words, stocks that were very, very small, companies that were very, very small, and shares that didn't trade very frequently. Then, under a variety of pseudonyms on a variety of internet bulletin boards, he would post, this is a great stock, wonderful buy, you need to get in on this stock, this company is going places, all kinds of hype messages about these stocks, these companies whose stocks he had bought. Then he would place a limit order with his online broker. A limit order says that you will sell the shares automatically when they reach a certain price. He didn't even have to be around to have that done. The trade was executed automatically. Then he would go off to middle school, not even high school. He went off to middle school. When he was 15 years old, the SEC fined him $250,000 because of this pump and dump scheme, and he had to sign a paper saying he would not do this anymore. He would cease and desist. Now, my children are grown now, but as the mother of former middle school children, I must say I had a lot of sympathy for this kid's parents. In the press articles about this, they were quoted as saying they had no idea what their son was doing online. And again, I do have sympathy with that. So again, don't do anything that could manipulate prices. And that's a classic example. Pumping up the stock without any valid information behind that. Next, I'm going to talk about Standard 3. Standard 3A is about loyalty, prudence, and care. Basically, this standard can be summed up as always put the client's interests first. What an investment professional has is a fiduciary duty to the clients. Now let me talk a little bit about what fiduciary duty means. First of all, think about all of the interests in your life. What comes first? Your family, your friends, your job, your charitable interests. Again, think about what comes first. You have a duty to the various parties in your life, and you have made a personal decision about what comes first. As far as this standard is concerned, first of all, it's concerned only with your job. And let me rephrase the question that I just asked a minute or two ago and say, on the job, to whom do you have a duty? Is it to your employer? Is it to the firm as an organization? Is it to the client? Is it to yourself? There's a very simple, easy answer to that question as far as the CFA Institute is concerned. The answer is you have a duty to your client. Your client is always going to come first. That's where your duty lies, and this is the way that you have to shape all of your actions. Now, let's look at a couple of examples of this. Let's take the case of Margaret. Margaret is a trust officer for a bank, so she manages money that are in trust for other people. One of her clients died recently, and the terms of his trust state that the income from the trust goes to his son during his son's lifetime, and then when his son dies, the principal of the trust goes to his daughter. So Margaret has looked at the trust, and the trust was almost exclusively invested in bonds. And she realizes that this is a very dicey time for bonds. Everybody is expecting interest rates to go up, and when interest rates go up, bond prices go down. So this portfolio is poised to lose a whole lot of value if, as expected, interest rates go up. So Margaret decides to diversify the portfolio. She sells some of the bonds and buys some equities instead, because equities are expected to have long-term stable growth for the future. Well, when Jack, her client's son, gets his first check, he is really upset. He knows that the check that he has gotten is less than the income that his father was getting from the trust. So he goes to Margaret. He is furious. He tells her, hey, this is ridiculous. What are you doing? You're taking too many fees. I want the same income that my father had from this trust. Well, first question, has Margaret violated her duty? Actually, no, she hasn't. She has a duty both to Jack, who wants income from the trust, and to Margaret, who wants principal from the trust. So she's interested both in preservation of principal and income. So it is true, by selling the bonds, she has reduced the income available from the trust. Jack's going to get a smaller check because he doesn't have as much coupon income from the bonds as he had before. But the trustee is fulfilling her duty to her client's daughter as well, by saying, hey, we need to make sure that we preserve principal, and if interest rates go up, a lot of principal is going to be lost. So in this case, Margaret had a duty to both parties, both to Jack as the income recipient and to the daughter as the principal recipient. And she did act in the best interests of both of her clients by diversifying that portfolio and reducing risk. Again, that's an example of fiduciary duty. Let's look at another example of fiduciary duty. Vesta Investment Management just hired a new marketing vice president, Miriam. She has been doing a great job as vice president. She's attracted 2 new clients to the firm, which hadn't been doing so well, and she attracted those clients on the strength of her own reputation. After getting the clients, she went to the fund manager and said, hey, we've got new clients. We've really got to beef things up and make sure we're doing right by these clients. She suggested that the fund managers go to their broker and get what is called soft dollars, research from the broker. Soft dollars are when part of the commissions go to pay for research. Miriam felt it would be really beneficial for the fund managers to have this research. It would allow them to do a better job picking stocks and managing the fund. When she went to the fund managers about this, they said, oh, well, wait, hey, you know, we're not really sure about this. We have used the same brokers forever and ever. They have done a really good job by us, and we just don't want to switch brokers. Is there a problem here? The answer is potentially yes. The firm has a duty to do the best job possible by its clients. If they've been using the same broker year after year, and they're not getting any particularly good benefit from that broker, they need to periodically shop around. Maybe another broker could give them the same kind of fees for trading and give them research that would be very, very helpful in picking stocks. So again, sometimes you need to look at what is being done, look at current practices, and see if changing that practice would improve things for the client. Again, always having the client's best interests at heart. When I was preparing to come here, I was looking at some recent cases in the Wall Street Journal and Business Week. And with all the scandals that have been happening, I had plenty of material to give you a real-life example of fiduciary duty and how that fiduciary duty was breached. The Bayou Management Fund recently, in last September, pled guilty to fraud. What they had done was misrepresented the amount of assets that were under management. They were telling all of their clients that they had assets of $410 million when they only had assets of $150 million. By the time the regulators realized what had happened, the fund's assets were down to $100 million, and they were promising a $7.1 billion payout from those funds over the next 10 years. What had happened is the investors and the regulators had ignored some pretty glaring warning signs about this particular firm. They had had previous securities violations. They had had infractions of the banking laws. One of the founders' resumes was very, very exaggerated. They had a lawsuit pending against them saying that they had unexplained withdrawals from the fund and some other possible rules violations. So again, there are plenty of real-world examples of how fiduciary duty has been breached. Once again, bottom line is, always do what is in the best interests of the clients. Next, I'm going to talk about Standard 3B, fair dealing. Basically, what this standard says is you must be fair and objective with all clients. Now, make a note, this does not mean that you need to treat all clients equally. It says that you must treat clients fairly. Now, let's take an example of this. Tom is a CFA, and he manages a hedge fund. Leslie is a broker at Mega Brokerage, and she handles all of the institutional trades. Well, one day Tom calls her and says, "Leslie, I am so sorry. I meant to put through this trade for one of my mutual funds, and I just forgot. Can you put through this trade?" Now, Leslie knows that it's after hours, but Tom is a really good client, and she certainly doesn't want to offend him, and she wants to keep his business in the future. So she says, "Okay, Tom, no problem. I'll put the trade through." So she puts the trade through at that day's price, even though trading has ended for the day. Well, over time, Tom keeps calling, "Leslie, got another trade for you," and another, all after hours trading. Have either Leslie or Tom violated the standard? The answer is yes. First of all, what is happening is that Leslie is giving priority to Tom as an institutional client. For all of the other clients of the firm, if they want to trade, they've got to wait till the next day to trade. What that means is, if Tom gets information after hours that he knows is going to affect the price of the stock, he can call Leslie and have the trade put through at the previous day's price. So he's getting an advantage that the other clients of this firm are not getting. So definitely Leslie is in violation of this standard by putting through trades for Tom, potentially at the expense of all the firm's other clients. Secondly, even though Tom is the one not actually making the trades, he also is in violation both of the standard, and he's legally liable as well for illegal trading. So again, this says treat clients fairly. Be fair and objective in dealings with all clients. Next, I'm going to talk about Standard 3C. This is all about suitability, that you need to know what is the client's experience level, what is their risk tolerance, and what are their goals. So this says look at each client as an individual and decide what investments are best for that individual. Let me give you a really simplified example of this. Suppose you know about an investment that's going to cost $100,000. There's a 51% chance that this investment is going to pay off big time, and a 49% chance that this investment will be totally worthless. Well, whether or not you recommend this investment depends on who your client is. If your client is multi-billionaire Bill Gates, to him, $100,000, not a big deal. He might be willing to take a very risky investment with a good chance of losing that entire $100,000 because, again, for him, $100,000 is a very small fraction of his total wealth. On the other hand, if you have a retiree whose total nest egg is $100,000, that would be a very unsuitable investment. Even though there's a 51% chance that it pays off big time, there's an almost 50% chance that the investment will be totally worthless and the retiree's nest egg will be totally wiped out. So again, you need to look at each client's needs and risk tolerance and choose investments that are right for that client. As another personal example, I recently had a guest speaker from the financial services industry come in and talk to my class. One of the student questions following the presentation was, what should I invest in? You know, here I am, a 22-year-old, just starting out. What's a good investment for me? And the guest speaker declined, and it really wasn't a cop-out. What he said is that she needed to sit down with a financial planner one-on-one and go over what her goals were, her short-term goals, her long-term goals, how much risk she was willing to take, and then make a decision based on her personal situation. Now, let me give you another example of suitability. This is a story about Joe, who works for a company, and he's the union representative for this company. And he very recently became the union's representative to the company's pension fund. And he ran on a ticket. He was very, very concerned about some of the investments that the fund was making. They had a commitment to invest only in socially responsible funds. And he thought that was a bunch of nonsense. He, like many of the others in the union, were baby boomers in their 50s, really starting to think about retirement. And he felt the fund was investing in way too many risky things. He felt they needed to get back to basics and have a nice conservative agenda to assure that he and his fellow baby boomers would have money to take care of them during their retirement. So after his election to the fund, when he went to the Board of Trustee meetings for the fund for the first time, he stood up and made an impassioned speech. No more of this socially acceptable stuff. We want good conservative investments. You guys have been investing in too many risky securities, and we are worried that we're not going to have the pension that we need when it comes time for us to retire. Well, is this a problem? Has the board been violating its duties? Has it been choosing investments that were not suitable? Well, the first thing that the Board of Trustees has to look at, and Joe has to look at as well, is what are the long-term goals of this fund? Well, Joe ran on a platform that appealed to his fellow baby boomers. There are more than just 50-somethings in the union. The pension fund has an obligation not only to the employees who are getting ready to retire, but also to the younger employees who've got a longer time horizon and are going to retire at some point in the future. So he is wrong to say, hey, you've got to invest only in conservative investments, take care of our retirement. The fund has a duty to the younger investors and may wish to invest in some riskier, high-growth securities that are going to pay off when the 20 and 30-somethings in the union are getting ready to retire. Now, as for the socially responsible part of it, it is true that the fund does not have a duty to select only socially responsible companies. Here, the fund might want to look at the socially responsible companies that it has selected and make sure that these do follow the financial responsibilities that the pension fund has both to its older employees who are getting ready to retire and to its younger employees who are going to retire some point in the future. So once again, the fund has to look at suitability of investments for all of its clients, not just the ones who are getting ready to retire. Next, I'm going to talk about Standard 3D. Standard 3D is all about performance presentation. Basically, what this standard says is you must be fair and accurate and complete in the information that you report. Now, typically, this standard applies to new customers and new accounts. What this says is, say you're advertising, our portfolios always earn 110% of our benchmark portfolio. You want to make sure that you have provided complete information and accurate information when you are making any sort of representations to clients. Now, let me tell a little story about this, give an example about this. White Rock Company is about to be acquired by IBI. White Rock runs a number of portfolios, or has a number of portfolios for clients, and of course they have prepared information about what the portfolio returns are over the length of time of the portfolios and what kind of risk levels the portfolio has. IBI takes White Rock's numbers and runs those numbers through their own computers to calculate their own statistics based on CFA standards about presentation. Well, there's a problem. After they run the numbers through, they find that there are some discrepancies. There are areas where White Rock has reported a greater portfolio performance than they found. Now, Jeff, the manager of White Rock, is really upset about this. He had thought that his firm was using the CFA standards, and he doesn't understand why there should be a discrepancy. Well, it turns out that when White Rock prepared its original statistics, they were doing a couple of things that were in violation of Standard 3D. First of all, what they did, they only included the accounts of clients that stayed with the firm. They didn't include the accounts of clients who left the firm. Now, presumably, the clients who left the firm did so because they were unhappy with performance. So this created something that is called a survivorship bias, that you end up with the portfolios of people who were the happiest, the ones who were the unhappiest left, and that tends to pull up the performance. The second thing that they did that was wrong is that they didn't include all of the portfolios, all of the clients in the portfolio, and they didn't use a consistent time period. They had varying time periods. They only reported the performance of the really good years and ignored some of the years when the performance was not as good. So again, bottom line of this standard, make sure that you have complete information. You're including all portfolios over a consistent period of time. Make sure that you have accurate information, that you are including all of the good information and bad information, so you are accurately portraying this portfolio's performance, and that you are fairly portraying this portfolio performance. Standard 3E is about preservation of confidentiality. What this standard says is you are required to disclose any illegal activities, but otherwise you must assume that you have a confidential relationship with the client and not disclose anything. So again, okay, if you know the client is doing something illegal, you're not a lawyer, you're not a priest, you are not allowed to keep illegal information confidential. You are required to disclose that. But otherwise, you do need to keep client information confidential. And let me give an example of this. Susan works for an investment management firm, and two of her clients, Peter and Rita, have been married for a really long time, 25 years of wonderful marriage, very, very happy together. In fact, Susan really envies how wonderful their marriage is. They both inherited money from their parents, and they have separate accounts at the firm. Now, typically, they allow Susan to make the investment decisions, but sometimes one or the other of them will call and transfer money from one account to another, or they'll want to make trades on their own account. Well, one day, Peter calls. Susan's out, so the floor broker takes the call. He wants to buy some stock in a hot new Asian energy company. So he orders the floor broker to buy a certain number of shares for his own account. Then he says, hey, you know, I think Rita's account should have this also. I want you to buy 500 shares for Rita's account as well. Well, the floor broker looks up the information and sees that Peter does not have the authority to trade on Rita's account. So he refuses to make the trade. He says, there's no permission. I can only trade on your account. I cannot trade on Rita's account. Susan comes back to the office, and she is furious that this deal has not been made. Peter is going to be angry. He's a good client. She doesn't want to anger him. And she said, now I'm going to have to make up the difference. I'm going to have to make the trade late and make up any difference in lost money than if the trade had been made when Peter requested it. Is there a violation here? Well, first of all, the floor broker did the right thing. The floor broker knows that there is a duty to keep client information confidential. There is nothing written in the file that says that Peter is allowed to trade Rita's account or Rita is allowed to trade Peter's account. As far as the floor broker is concerned, they can only trade their own accounts. What Susan needed to do was first get written permission, have a statement saying that it's okay for the spouse to trade in the other's account. Without that permission, any trading is a breach of this standard, is a breach of confidentiality. So again, Susan should not have made trades on the other partner's behalf without written permission, and the floor broker was correct to refuse to trade on Rita's account without having that written permission. Let's look at another example of this. Clark is a broker in a small firm, and two of his clients are an elderly couple. They just filed a complaint against Clark, saying that he didn't buy any long-term bonds for their portfolio and that he therefore lost the opportunity, since interest rates were high, lost the opportunity to get some very high-income securities for them. Clark is really frustrated by this complaint. He had spent hours with the couple trying to convince them to invest in more conservative securities like the long-term bonds. The couple was totally invested in equities, and he was very concerned that this was a lot of risk for them and wanted to get them into some more income-producing securities. He's about to go to his meeting with the lawyer, and he looks at his notes with all of his many meetings with these two clients, and he realizes he really didn't document those talks. He didn't write any notes in his day timer. He really doesn't have anything to back up what were some really long, frustrating conversations with this elderly couple. But he knows what he said, and he knows that he did the right thing by his clients. They just wouldn't listen to him. So he takes his day timer and he writes in the day timer all of the detailed notes as best as he could remember, very accurately what he said to those clients, and he goes to see the lawyer. The company's lawyer takes one look at the day timer and says, hey, you know, you're going to be even in more trouble with this. It's very clear that the ink doesn't match. It's clear that you filled in notes after the fact. And now, on top of the complaint, you could be charged with fraud. Even though Clark insists that he did the right thing and explained all the risks, explained everything to his clients, he did not keep good records of it. And therefore, the lawyer encouraged him to settle with these clients because he could not prove that he had acted in the client's best interests. Now Clark, again, as I say, Clark is very indignant about this. And Clark doesn't want there to be any kind of stain on his record because of this action, because of this complaint. So he wants to insert a clause in the agreement that he's going to reach with this elderly couple that says that all details about this will remain confidential. Is there a breach here of the standards? If that clause goes in there, yes, there is. The confidentiality part applies to the investment professional keeping the client's information confidential. It does not apply to a situation where the investment professional wants things to be kept confidential. Again, the problem is Clark's problem. He failed to keep complete notes, and as a result, he has had this complaint successfully settled against him. So again, he is not allowed by this standard to keep things confidential. Now, that's the end of Standard 3. Let's move on to Standard 4. Standard 4 is all about duties to employers. What duties do you have as an employee to your employer? The basic rule is that you owe loyalty to your employer. You cannot do anything that harms your employer. Now, typically, this standard applies to people who are leaving one job and moving to another job. This standard makes sure that they do not harm their former employer in moving to a new employer. However, this standard applies to people who plan on remaining employed by the same employer over a long period of time. What it says is they can't do anything outside of the firm that would damage the firm. It says that if they, for example, are taking on some kind of outside employment, maybe consulting, that they need to disclose to their employer what they're doing, how they're being compensated, and anything else that the employer needs to know. Let's look at some examples of Standard 4A loyalty. Let's take the case of Mike. Mike works for a brokerage firm that is looking to deal with private equity for its clients. So after a lot of work, Mike develops a very extensive database and tracking program to track clients' investments in private equity. Well, things change. The manager of the fund decides private equity really isn't the way to go. So they don't use Mike's program, they put it on the back burner, and Mike gets assigned to risk management for pension liabilities. This is boring. He really hates his new job and his new duties. So he starts looking around, and he's able to land a job with a private equity firm. As he's cleaning out his desk and getting ready to move on, he finds this old program. He'd forgotten about it. It was so long ago. He stuffs it into his briefcase and takes it with him and says, "Hey, no problem. These guys aren't going to use the program. They decided not to get into private equity, so I can take it with me to my new firm and use this." Is Mike in violation? Yes, he is. Even though his old firm is not using the tracking program, this is something that he developed as an employee, and it belongs to his old firm, not his new firm. He could only take it with him if he talked to his employers and explained about this and received their permission to take and use that tracking program. Now let's take another example. Jane works for a firm that services institutional and trust clients. She feels that they're not focused enough in this area, and that if she moved to a different firm, she could better service her clients and do a better job both for herself and the clients. Her boss understands that the current job is not a good match for Jane, and he understands that she's on the lookout for another job. But he does warn her that the clients belong to her current firm, not her new firm, and that she is not allowed to solicit any clients for her new firm while she is still working for her old firm. Jane has an extensive list of institutional and trust investors, and she's marked on this list which clients are hers at the old firm. She realizes that that would be a breach to take that list with her, so she leaves it in her old office. She goes to work for her new firm. She goes to the internet and downloads a list of all of the institutional and trust clients. It's the same list that she had in her old firm, but it's a publicly available list. She has downloaded it from the internet. Using her memory to the best of her ability, she circles which clients were her old clients and then proceeds to start calling her former clients to see if they are interested in switching to her new firm. Has Jane committed a violation of the standards? Actually, she probably has not committed a violation of the standards. She did not take in any information from her old firm to her new firm. She got a list of publicly available information. She remembered which clients she had, and now under her new firm, which she truly believes is better able to service the clients and will be more dedicated to the clients' needs, she is now soliciting those clients for her new firm. Again, she did not take any proprietary information that belonged to her old firm to her new firm, and again is able, now using publicly available information, to solicit clients. Standard 4B is about additional compensation arrangements. Are you doing work for anybody outside of the company that you're employed with? And are you getting compensation in any way? And note that compensation does not just mean money. Of course, it includes money, but it could include any other kinds of gifts or benefits that you get from working for someone else. The standard is not against outside arrangements. It simply states that if you do get any outside compensation, this needs to be done with the knowledge and permission of your employer. If your employer says it's okay, that's fine. Now, let's look at an example of this. Alan is a CFA candidate who works for a regional bank and trust company. He manages funds for the bank's trust clients. And one of the trust clients, a very elderly gentleman, came to Alan looking for places where he could make charitable donations from his trust fund. Alan recommended that he donate to the local community center. He and his wife and children have had wonderful experiences at the community center and felt that they could really benefit from a grant from this trust. Sure enough, the bank's client did indeed give the trust money to the community center, and the community center manager was very, very grateful that Alan was able to steer the trust in his direction. The grant would be very, very useful in developing the community center's programs. The manager of the community center told Alan that while they couldn't change banks, they really could use some additional recommendations about what would be good portfolio choices for the community center. So Alan looked at all of the community center's information, and he made some recommendations about what he thought, how they should handle their money and where they should invest their money. A week or so later, he gets a check in the mail for services rendered. Now, Alan felt that the work that he did for the community center was volunteer work and he shouldn't get compensated for it, so he returned the check to the community center. Then, months later, when he got his annual statement and bill from the community center, he saw that he had a balance of 0. It was marked complimentary. Alan decided that this was fine to accept the gift of membership and didn't bother saying anything to his employer. Did Alan violate the standard? Yes, he did. First of all, he should have reported the check that he received, even though he didn't keep the check. And certainly the complimentary membership in the community center was a gift, it had value, and he should have reported that to his employer. It doesn't mean that he should not necessarily have accepted it. If it was fine with his employer, that's okay, but he needs to disclose any additional compensation arrangements that he has. Now, the next standard, Standard 4C, is about responsibilities to supervisors. A supervisor does have a responsibility to make sure that his or her employees are complying to the standards and are behaving ethically. Now, this responsibility isn't just a one-time deal, that you see behavior, you say, hey, don't do that anymore, and that's it. This is an ongoing process. A supervisor needs to be aware of what his or her employees are doing, and if he or she sees unacceptable behavior, then they need to correct that behavior. Let's look at an illustration of this standard. Fred works for a firm that handles portfolios of high net worth individuals. Because so many of the clients are elderly and have retired to Florida, Mike, Fred's boss, decided, why don't we open a branch office down in Florida? He put Fred in charge of the branch office and said, remember, this is not an expansion strategy, this is simply an office of convenience, so I really need you to keep the costs down. So Fred hires a small group of brokers to handle the clients, and he finds that business is doing just great. He has generated a lot of commissions, he has lots and lots of visits from the elderly clients, and he attributes it to the fact that they're retired, they've got lots of time on their hands, and they want to manage their portfolios. He does decide, because of the cost problem, that this small branch office doesn't need a compliance officer. He can take care of making sure that all the rules are followed. Well, everything is going along fine until he gets sued by the children of some of his clients. The problem is their broker, Anita, who works for Fred, decided to rebalance their portfolio and move them into small cap, very high growth stocks. Not only did the stocks not do as well as they had expected them to do, but some of the stocks in the portfolio had been held for 20 years. So when the heirs inherited, they found a huge tax liability that had not been taken care of. They sued, saying that first the investments were unsuitable, and second, the broker had not worked to minimize taxes and therefore maximize value of the portfolio. Fred was really concerned. First of all, he was concerned that he might not get his bonus because of this lawsuit. Should Fred also be concerned about violating this standard? The answer is yes. Fred should be concerned. He did not properly supervise Anita. He did not have a compliance officer who might have taken over some of that job. He needed to see what Anita was doing, see that she was making portfolio recommendations that were not suitable for elderly clients, and basically not performing her job of maximizing the portfolio value. Not only is Fred in violation of this standard, but his boss Mike is in violation also. He was given control, Fred was given control of the office by Mike and told, hey, go for it. Just generate commission money and make this a base of convenience for our clients. Mike also needed to know what Fred was doing and ensure that the office was in compliance and following standards. Let's look at Standard 5, Investment Analysis, Recommendations, and Actions. What this standard says is you need to make sure that you are exercising due diligence and, very importantly, that you have a reasonable basis for any recommendations that you make. What that means is your research has to be thorough and you have to be able to support any recommendations that you make. So again, what this says is make sure that everything you do has a basis. You can back up your recommendations. Let's look at an example of this. Mario works for an investment banking firm. He covers the biotech industry. His boss, Jackie, asked him to write a report about a health company. The investment banking group is looking at an initial public offering for this group and wanted some background material. Mario really doesn't know much about the healthcare industry, and he's kind of stuck, but he has a friend who he knows does research in this area. So he calls his friend, asks her for any information that she has on the area, and she sends him a lot of good stuff to use about analyzing this particular report. Well, as Mario is preparing his report, he's looking over some of the numbers and, a little puzzled by some of the terms. Again, this isn't really his field. I mean, there's something called capitation revenue, and he's not quite sure what that is. But he figures, I'll just add that to the fee revenue. That'll be close enough. He takes his numbers, puts them into his model, and comes up with what he considers to be an okay price, again, given the fact that this isn't an area that he really knows a lot about. He went to the internet, downloaded some articles about the company, downloaded some articles about the industry, wrote that up in his introduction, and gave it to his boss, Jackie. Jackie was really swamped at this time of year. She didn't have a chance to look at his report, but she took his report and brought it over to the investment banking side. They took his report and, on the basis of the report, recommended an initial public offering price, a stock price, for this company. The clients of the firm invested in the company, and a few months later, the company lost a major contract that it had with an HMO, and its capitation revenue declined dramatically. Turned out that just a few months after the initial public offering, the stock was trading 40% below the initial public offering price. Did Mario commit a violation of this standard? Yes, he did. First of all, he largely took someone else's research. He modified that research, but without any real knowledge. He put information into his report that he was very unsure of, really didn't know what he was talking about, and passed that report on. His supervisor, Jackie, is also at fault. She violated the previous standard that I talked about, responsibilities of supervisors. She failed to make sure that Mario did have a reasonable basis for the recommendations that he was making. So again, whenever you make recommendations, you need to be able to support those recommendations. You need to have facts to back them up. You need to have a reasonable basis, and you need to be very thorough and complete in the research that you do. Standard 5B is all about communication. Communication with both existing clients and with prospective clients. It is very important to make sure that you not only disclose your recommendation, but you tell the clients, how was this analysis made? Why did you come to this recommendation? And you need to make sure you include enough information so the client or prospective client can really understand it. What this means is you have to distinguish between fact and opinion. You're going to have some opinions, some basis for those opinions, and you need to explain the difference between those two. And you also need to make sure that you are an independent analyst, we talked about that earlier, and that you have a very reasonable basis for that recommendation. So all of these are kind of tied together, that you disclose, that you are independent, and that you have a reasonable basis for your recommendation. Let's look at an example of this. Jillian is trying to attract clients to their new emerging markets fund. She talks with the fund's manager, and he explains all about interest rate fluctuations and currency fluctuations, expropriation risk, and all kinds of risks that are associated with this emerging markets fund. Jillian realizes there is no way that the average investor is really going to understand all of this jargon. So she takes the information and writes it up in very clear language, but she leaves off a lot of the risks. That's the part that's really hard to understand, and it would just be Greek to any reader. She submits her report and is very surprised when the next day she gets a phone call from her boss and a requirement to go down to the legal department. Her boss has forestalled a potential problem. Jillian has not adequately disclosed the risks. Investing in an emerging markets fund is very risky, and the client needs to know and understand exactly what those risks are. So even if it is difficult to understand information, even if it's a field that's filled with lots of jargon, the analyst has a responsibility to make sure that it can be written in very clear, easy to understand language, and make sure that the client really does understand all of the risks and rewards of a particular investment. The last part of this standard is about record retention. It is very important for the analyst to keep complete records and appropriate records. Actually, I illustrated this earlier in the story of Clark, who had talked to his elderly clients about their investments and tried to convince them that they should get into more appropriate investments, and he was unsuccessful and then very dismayed when they sued later on and filed a complaint against him. He had not kept adequate records. A lot of problems could have been forestalled if he had taken the time, even though he was a very busy person, if he had taken the time to write down those conversations and document everything that he had talked about. Standard 6 is all about conflicts of interest. It is very important to disclose any existing conflicts of interest and even any potential conflicts of interest. Very important not even to have an appearance of conflicts of interest. What this means is you need to communicate any possible conflicts in very plain, clear language. Now, this includes conflicts of interest that could impact a relationship with a client, as well as conflicts of interest that could impact employer relationships. Let's look at an example of this. Susan works for a bank in the U.S. specializing in U.S. value equities. A very good friend of hers is getting married in Italy, and she goes to the wedding. The groom works for a German investment bank, and he tells her all about the great new funds that they've got that his bank is managing in Germany. Susan says, oh, fine, as a favor to the bride and groom, hey, they're just starting out. She writes a check and opens an account. Then she goes back home and doesn't think a whole lot about that account. A little bit later, Susan is interviewing for other jobs and takes a new job with another firm. She still doesn't think of the German account. It's very, very small, and in fact, when she started working for her new employer, she was required, as most employers will require, she was required to list all the places where she had accounts. She just overlooked that German account. It was very small and, again, not a big deal. She didn't remember it until she got her quarterly statement from the German bank. And then she said, small account. I don't deal in international equities anyway. I deal only in U.S. equities. There's no real conflict here. Has she violated this standard? The answer is yes, she has. Actually, she probably violated the standard both at her old employer and her new employer. Most employers do require their employees to state where they have accounts. And Susan failed to disclose the fact that she had opened a new account with this German investment bank. And certainly when she went to work for her new employer and they asked her to list all of the accounts she had, she failed to list this account, and that was a violation of the standard. In another example, Casella Bank and Trust manages a lot of portfolios for their clients. They're discretionary portfolios, which means that they can choose which stocks to buy and sell for those portfolios. Chris Casella, the president of the bank, sits on the board of directors of JP Global Manufacturing. JP is the biggest employer in the area and brings a lot of business into the bank. Now, JP's fortunes have been going down recently. And Chris knows that JP is going to give a call pretty soon and ask that the bank buy some JP stock to shore up the price. In anticipation of the call, since he sits on the chairman of the board, Chris is very familiar with all the people at JP Global. In anticipation of that call, Chris orders all of his brokers to start buying JP stock for their discretionary accounts. He is very surprised when one of his trust officers refuses to buy JP stock. Is there a problem here? Is there a conflict of interest? Yes, there is. Chris is president of the bank, and he also sits on the board of JP Global. He is buying JP Global stock to shore up the global stock position, even if that might not be in the best interests of the clients whose portfolios his bank manages. That is definitely a conflict of interest. The bank clients need to be informed that the president of the bank is both on the board of JP Global and has been buying JP Global stock for their portfolios. So again, very important, if there are any conflicts, to disclose those conflicts. Standard 6B is about priority of transactions. You need to make sure that the client goes first, not you, not any people from whom you could benefit, not family members, not anyone with whom you have an interest. What this standard means is it is wrong, illegal, and unethical for you to trade ahead of the other clients of the firm. In other words, to get a benefit that every client of the firm does not get. Now let's look at an example of this. Kristen has just started working for an investment firm. She was required to list all of the accounts that she had, and she did so. She is a new graduate, so she really doesn't have much money. She had one very, very small account, and she's still working really, really hard at paying off all of her student loans. Her boss noted that she's driving a new car recently, has some really great-looking clothes, and he's wondering where she's gotten all the money for this. Her accounts basically have stayed the same, very low accounts, still working on those student loans. Then he finds out that Kristen has a new boyfriend, and he figured, correctly as it turns out, that Kristen's boyfriend is the one who bought her the new car and the new clothes. Well, it turns out that while Kristen is getting information on the company intranet about various trades and various recommendations before the general public gets it and before the clients get it. Kristen has been giving this information to her boyfriend. He's been trading on Kristen's advice, making a lot of money, and in turn giving Kristen a new car and new clothes. Is this a violation? Yes, it is, even though Kristen personally is not the one making the trades. She is giving her boyfriend private information, and her boyfriend is trading ahead of the other clients of the firm. He is getting an advantage that is not available to the other clients. So again, even though Kristen herself is not making the transactions, she is in violation because she is benefiting from that information and from the transactions. The last part of Standard 6 is about referral fees. This states that if you get a referral fee, in other words, if you refer a client to someone else for another service and you receive some kind of compensation for that service, you need to disclose it. And let's look at an example of that. Jim's a CPA with a large base of clients, and his friend Jamie is a broker. They look at each other's client base and notice they've got some clients in common and talk about having Jim refer some of his physician clients to Jamie as a broker. Jim and Jamie are both very uncomfortable with having any kind of a referral fee. But what they decide to do is that if Jamie has profited from the business that Jim has sent him, Jamie's going to pay for their annual ski vacation that both families take together. Is this a violation? Yes, it is. Again, it's okay to do it as long as it is disclosed. As long as Jim's clients know that Jim is referring them to a broker who is in turn giving a benefit to Jim, the benefit of the ski vacation, and that the clients know what this benefit is and they approve of this benefit, that's fine. If it is not disclosed, it is in violation of this standard. Standard 7 is about CFA candidate and member responsibilities. The first part of Standard 7 talks about conduct, that you must not do anything that compromises the reputation or integrity of the CFA Institute. Let's look at an example of this. Ike is a CFA candidate and he's getting ready to take the exam. He's really nervous about this exam and very concerned about it. His supervisor, Katie, is also concerned. She knows how nervous Ike is. She also knows that she is being graded and rewarded on how well she develops subordinates. And part of that development is making sure that Ike does indeed pass the CFA exam. Katie is a proctor of the CFA exam this year. And she takes her copy of the exam, kind of waves it in the air, and as she's passing Ike by said, the questions this year are pretty tough. I'm going to leave this exam out on my office desk for a while. Then she goes away, leaving the door to her office open. Ike is pretty sure that Katie has sent him a clear signal to go in and take a peek at that exam. And he certainly has plenty of opportunity to do so. He's a little bit reluctant to do it, but his nervousness and concern about the exam overrides that, and he goes into Katie's office, reads the exam, and now has a really good understanding of what's going to be on the exam. His best friend Caitlin is also taking the exam, so he calls her and tells her all about the kinds of questions that are on the exam so they can both focus their study efforts much better. Is there a violation? Yes, there are several violations here. First of all, Ike has an obligation not to cheat on the exam, even if he has an opportunity, even if a wonderful opportunity is presented to him. It is his obligation to pass up that opportunity. So he has violated this standard by not acting with integrity. Similarly, his boss, Katie, has violated the standard. She is not supposed to make it easy for Ike to cheat at all, and she does this. You could argue that she didn't out and out tell him, here it is, go cheat, but she certainly gave him the opportunity and made it clear that that opportunity was there. Caitlin also violated this standard. She should not have taken any information from Ike or used it for her study session. Standard 7B talks about references to the CFA Institute, the CFA designation, and the CFA program. This standard states that candidates and members are not allowed to exaggerate or misrepresent in any way the CFA standards, CFA Institute, CFA designations. Let's look at an example of this. Jack and Mary and John have decided to form their own firm. It's called Lone Pine Investments, and they're an investment advisory group. Jack has a CFA Level 3, and he passed all 3 levels on the first try, so he feels this makes him much smarter than average. One of his partners took the level 1, but he's just been too busy to try to mess with any of the other levels. And the third partner has taken levels 1 and 2, thinks that she has passed level 3, but she hasn't really heard anything about it yet. They developed this great ad for Lone Pine. It says, "Invest in Lone Pine. We have the CFA seal of approval. 2 members with level 3 designations, 1 member with a level 1 designation." Is this ad in violation? Yes, it is. It's in violation on several accounts. First of all, there is no CFA seal of approval, and no one can advertise that they have any kind of CFA seal of approval. Second, only one of the principals actually has the level 3 and has passed it. One of the other principals has only taken the exam, and he thinks he's passed, but he's really not sure about that. And the third one only has a CFA level 1, and that is not a designation. You can't advertise that as if that is a particular accomplishment in and of itself. So they have misused the CFA trademark and the CFA brand in several respects in their ad. Standard 7B talks about references to the CFA Institute, the CFA designation, and the CFA program. This standard states that candidates and members are not allowed to exaggerate or misrepresent in any way the CFA standards, CFA Institute, CFA designations. Let's look at an example of this. Jack and Mary and John have decided to form their own firm. It's called Lone Pine Investments, and they're an investment advisory group. Jack has a CFA level 3, and he passed all 3 levels on the first try, so he feels this makes him much smarter than average. One of his partners took the level 1, but he's just been too busy to try to mess with any of the other levels. And the third partner has taken levels 1 and 2, thinks that she has passed level 3, but she hasn't really heard anything about it yet. They developed this great ad for Lone Pine. It says, "Invest in Lone Pine. We have the CFA seal of approval. 2 members with level 3 designations, 1 member with a level 1 designation." Is this ad in violation? Yes, it is. It's in violation on several accounts. First of all, there is no CFA seal of approval, and no one can advertise that they have any kind of CFA seal of approval. Second, only one of the principals actually has the level 3 and has passed it. One of the other principals has only taken the exam, and he thinks he's passed, but he's really not sure about that. And the third one only has a CFA level 1, and that is not a designation. You can't advertise that as if that is a particular accomplishment in and of itself. So they have misused the CFA trademark and the CFA brand in several respects in their ad.